Happy Mushoku Mondays, everybody. Welcome back to another track, the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We are on Redundant Reincarnation, Volume 2, The God Who Dwells in the Sword Sanctum. Sanctum. Yes, we're finally getting into Gino Brits. We're finally going to dig into this random dude that pops up out of nowhere. He's super OP, takes down the former sword god that even Edis couldn't take down. This guy that apparently can take down Alec. Who the hell is this guy? We're going to find out finally. We're going to finally find out. This is what I've been loving about these side chapters. They've just been all this juicy stuff about the characters that are around Rudius that, unfortunately, the mainline series wanted to kind of put the wayside. Put it over here. Like Talhan last week. Holy crap, dude. We finally find out about Talhan. This guy that's been in this series the entire time that just disappears. But anyways, sup chat. Welcome to the premiere. Thank you guys so much for dropping by for it. I really appreciate you guys' support, all your kind words, all that stuff. It means a great deal to me. You guys are absolutely fantastic. And yes, even more so, greatly appreciate everybody support channel monetarily through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, memberships. It's you guys that keeps this going. As much as I love the vocal support and the smashing that like button that nobody does. Literally nobody. I seen 0 likes last week. It may have been a bug. I'm joking. But you guys don't hit it up. But yes, thank you everybody at Support Channel monetarily. That's the big thing that keeps things going. Nicholas last week with 5 memberships. Thank you for running some emotes on people. Thank you so much. Noah last week with 30 months. Been around for 30 months. Why are you still here? I'm joking. And then Rose Moist, as always, every single week. Thank you so much, Rose Moist, with the super. Thank you. That said, we should jump right into it. Again, The God Who Dwells in the Sword Sanctum chapters, which is Chapter 1, Sword God Gino Brits. Sword God Gino Brits was said to be the weakest sword god who ever lived. Exactly why I'm so surprised is how this dude popped up out of nowhere and took over things. He never once left the Sword Sanctum, nor were there any tales of him defeating a mighty foe. Of all the sword gods, his name was the most obscure, and future generations said that he only earned the title thanks to aging out the old guard. We find out that's very quickly not true because all the emperors left and they could have all taken him down. They didn't out-age him. Few ever made the effort to find out the truth of whether he was really the weakest. But one thing was beyond doubt. Of all the sword gods in history, he lived the longest. Very interesting. Very interesting there. Because, yeah, people are going to want his title and they may come to claim his title. Other people may want to defeat him in order to prove themselves, which does prove right there alone that he was strong. Gino Brits was born in the Sword Sanctum. His father was a sword emperor, and his mother was a sword god's younger sister. His earliest memories was of sword practice when he was about 3 years old, holding a child's wooden practice sword, while his father taught him how to swing it. This memory was a blueprint of the rest of his childhood, which was dominated by the sword. After waking up, he went on a run, then practiced his swings. After breakfast, he had practice. After lunch, he had more practice. After the sunset, he fit in a short break before dinner, then did his sword swings again before bed. That was his life. That sounds really boring. I'm sorry. That sounds really boring. Gino didn't actually like sword fighting very much. He kept up his practice, but only because his parents made him do it. He'd never once said to himself, I want this. When he was little, that hadn't mattered. Everyone around him was either a sword fighter or had once been. All the other children did it, and whenever he learned a new technique, his mother and father would be proud of him. You know, this is already starting to kind of paint this picture because I did break down the following chapters, but didn't really kind of deep dive into them. This is already kind of painting the picture of how easily he can sort of find something and get stuck on it. Because again, it doesn't really paint this as if it's something that he really cares about. And it is sort of giving me the perspective that when it comes to his final goal, he can easily prioritize something else, the one he falls in love with, and not so much care for the idea of proving something. Really is what it is, proving something. He doesn't have a reason for proving something. And that was sort of my assumption that happened, is that finally when he had something that he wanted, he went for it full blast. He was always seemingly the weakest and never really proved to be something strong because he didn't have a purpose. He didn't care about this. Even the retired old man that lived nearby called Gino a good boy when he ran by carrying his practice sword. He had no reason to question it. The sword was his life. As he advanced in years as well as rank, things began to change. His sword emperor father had been happy just to see the sword in his hand when he was a child. But once Gino reached the advanced tier, he grew stricter, saying, when you swing your sword, you should try to best your opponent. And you are still weak. You might have a bit of talent, but don't get cocky. He trained Gino harder than ever. At first, the adults at the training hall, where he had been born and raised, treated him with fondness. But Gino advanced steadily, first to intermediate tier, then to advanced tier. As they lost to him in duels, they began to look at him with overt dislike. Around that time, Gino stopped enjoying sword work. He finally seems to like it, and just because he beats other people, suddenly they don't like him, and it's like, I don't like this. I beat people, they don't like me. It's very different than the perspective of somebody like Edis that we've seen the most of when it comes to sword practice. She likes besting people. There's an enjoyment out of dueling people. And there's frustration that seem to come from other people because Edis beats them. But there's always like this element of just overcoming somebody and having it simply be about whoever's the best. With Gino, it's like, I don't really care about this. Okay, I'm getting better. Cool. Okay, then nobody likes me. I don't like this no more. Again, this is his entire life. From childhood, from age 3, he's swinging a sword, and it's not bringing him joy. It was not as if he wanted to do anything else with his life. A child from another country might have just said that he wanted to become an adventurer, but the idea of leaving home never occurred to him, because his parents never taught him that such things were possible. There was no need. The whole world outside the Sword Sanctum was a place that Gino knew nothing about, and so he continued with the sword. Yeah, sounds very much like Nina. Nina didn't really seem to know much about the outside world either. And then we're going to get into her now. Nina, the sword god's daughter, grew up alongside him and was his only friend. At the Sword Sanctum, no one below Saint tier was permitted to even enter the main training hall. All other people, children included, trained in a location close to home. Nina was no exception despite her parentage, so she trained alongside Gino. She wasn't the only other child who was Gino's age, but she was the only one who skilled with a sword matched his own. The two of them spoke the same language, and every conversation was about sword fighting. Despite Gino's ambivalence about sword work, he was more or less a genius. Even as a child, he came up with somewhat outlandish battle theories, and Nina was the only one amongst their peers who could keep up with him. Yeah, I think if I recall correctly, she outdid him at some point, and that's when they left. And then we found out later that he took the Sword God title. So it makes sense that they were pretty much still on par with each other at this point. Nina was the ringleader amongst the kids, rounding up the other children her age and ruling over them. I mean, I would assume that's the case because of who her father is. That didn't just mean the kids at the same training hall, but all those in all the training halls throughout the Sword Sanctum. Skill with the sword was the measure the children of the Sword Sanctum used to judge everything, and she was the strongest of them all. Nina, in part thanks to her father, had the ability to back up her authority. In her spare time, when she wasn't drilling sword skills, she organized the other children into a kids-only secret organization. Okay, we're going to start to actually develop them outside just doing this over and over again. I was hoping to get a little bit more into these kids besides just doing this over and over again, and, oh, they're stronger, or no, they're not stronger. I do like advancing Gino a little bit here, though, because it is talking about the idea that he has these outlandish battle theories. It does sort of give him something more than just what was drilled into his head as swinging a sword, swinging a sword, swinging a sword. There has to be something unique about him besides, Doki Doki, I love Nina, and thus I'm going to overthrow the sword god. Something will hopefully be from that, which is why he was able to overcome him. Because that's been the big question mark. What did he do to take down the sword god besides love is power? Because, I mean, if it's just that, that's fine, because, again, it plays into the initial setup of him and the idea that he has nothing. All he has the sword, and he doesn't really seem to like it. That him finding something outside of that will essentially drive him to get stronger. But it'd be nice to have something else to sort of add to that. He has theories in battle. Gino was also a member, and he ended up being Nina's lieutenant, partly because he was the second strongest, but also because he and Nina understood each other the best. Nina and Gino seemed to see sword fighting in a different way than the others. For example, none of the other children under Nina's command ever advanced beyond the rank of Sword Saint. Nina's organization lasted about 5 years, but it petered out when Nina became a Sword Saint, around the same time that Gino did. So this would be like just before Edis arrived there, because when Edis arrived there, Nina was already a Sword Saint. And so that would make sense why they never really mentioned any of this stuff. She probably focused strictly on trying to advance to king. They are amongst the earliest in the history to do so. Gino was exceptionally young, only 12. When it happened, people were shocked. "Is he the youngest?" they exclaimed. And his mother and father both praised him to the heavens. But Gino didn't really feel happy about it. Again, probably because he's being ostracized by other people because of it. Doing what he was told didn't seem like much of an achievement. Besides, Nina, who was 4 years older, was stronger than him. When Nina and Gino became Sword Saints, Yeah, if I remember correctly, was it... I might be misremembering here, but I seem to remember Rada wasn't very impressed by him, question mark? Wasn't it Rada that wasn't very impressed by him? Of course, I think there was a lot of emphasis in that whole thing about, like, you know, the potential of people. When Nina and Gino became Sword Saints, they were permitted to practice in the main training hall. Even then, nothing really changed. Their sword training continued, day in and day out. Just like before, he and Nina always practiced together because they were close in age and skill. As always, Nina treated him like her underling, dragging him everywhere with her. Nina was still the ringleader, even if the group around her was now composed of older swordswomen. Only swordswomen? Interesting. Again, I could see her having a lot of influence because of who her father is, but because she just entered that place, you could see a lot of them seeing her as a kohai rather than somebody that has some sort of seniority over them. But women, I guess I can see that specifically. The only thing that changed was how far his new training hall was from his house. Actually, there was one other thing. He also had more opportunities to learn from Nina's father, the sword god Galfalion. Gino's father was always saying things like, wield your sword to be strong at the dinner table. What Gal told Gino was a total opposite to what his father said. The gist of what Gal said was, wield your sword for yourself. Interesting. And I know this is like I'm overcomplicating this, but this technically is a big turning point for him, so obviously it does have significance here. Gino's father says, will it to get strong? Well, I don't really care about getting strong. What does that even matter? Whoop-de-doo. Oh, my muscles are getting bigger. This isn't changing really much. Over here, Gal's saying, wield your sword for yourself. Thus, it turns to what do you value? Which, yes, will later on, as we see, will turn to I want Nina. And thus, for myself is to do this for Nina, to gain Nina. But the point there is that it's giving it value in a blank canvas. What am I going to draw now? There's suddenly potential. Over here, it's simply is just, well, my muscles are strong, so I guess I'm already strong. Where do I go from here? There's no route. There's no value to grab towards. Wield it for yourself suddenly paints this canvas of what can I do with this? What can I do with this? It's much different, much different. Gino can more or less grasp the difference in philosophy there, but he wasn't quite sure of the specifics, nor which was right. Neither quite clicked for him. Whatever he chose, so long as he did his assigned practice, no one got angry at him. And as long as he didn't lose too many of the occasional mock battles, no one bothered him. He didn't win mock duels as often, now that he had moved to the main training hall, but he was up against adults, more than a decade his senior. Yeah. Again, he was brought in there very young. He achieved this at a very young age. No one blamed him for losing duels here and there. There had been changes, but for the most part, it seemed to Gino that everything was the same. That changed the day she arrived. The Chaos Bringer. She arrives. The dog arrives. Edis wasted no time in making a spectacular debut. She took down Gino and Nina before they knew what hit them, leaving everyone present thunderstruck. It was a crushing defeat. I don't know. I don't think they ever implied that Gino was changed by this. It's saying here that, yes, things change, but I'm curious if that will be more for specifically Nina. Things changed for Gino because things changed in Nina. Because I don't recall them ever implying that Gino was really ever around them. Yes, they had this one duel, but then it was always focused on Edis being around Nina. And again, that might be the big change that he's going to talk about. Suddenly, Nina's no longer around me. Suddenly, Nina's looking at me with a blush or something like that. Because again, love starts happening because what Edis introduced to Nina was that I'm doing this for a boy. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, Nina's going, what is this romance thing? And now suddenly, romance. That in and of itself didn't feel like a big change to Gino. Losing was an everyday occurrence. His peers revered his genius, but he lost to Nina all the time. He'd never been caught off guard like that before, but it would end similarly if he were cross swords with his father or the sword god. So it didn't feel worse than that. He wasn't entirely without any bitter feelings, but those faded quickly that night when the sword god told him flatly, "You are too green," and his father scolded him. Again, he's used to being scolded, but to this level, the sword god said that, and then his father said that. That's a 1-2 punch. He learned that Edis had done exactly what she should have done by beating him. Still, he thought, They wouldn't look kindly on me imitating her at the training hall, so I better not. Interesting. He learned, it doesn't say specifically from Galfalion or his father, but he learned from somewhere or somebody that Edis did exactly what she should have done by beating him, and he wanted to imitate her. She did something crazy. She was so vicious, she didn't even, hesitate. She took me down so fast. I can do that too. Should I try to do that? Should I get better because somebody that beat me did something that overcame me? Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should learn from her. But he's like, nope, I better not. They might not like me doing that. Because everybody's looking at, again, everybody doesn't like Edis. They don't like her. There's a lot of people that are afraid of her. She's too unhinged. Gino wants to learn from them, which does make me already... Yes, I'm already connecting it. Again, earlier, all the different theories and whatnot he had for battle that he was always looking into. Add on to that, Edis doing something outside of the norm. What if I do that against him? I wonder if he's going to apply something that Edis did that will overcome the sword god. It was Nina who really changed. There you go. Unlike Gino, her bruised face flushed deep red with mortification. And she didn't say another word that day. When Gino went home after finishing his practice at the training hall, he found her hiding and bawling while she swung her sword, muttering the same thing over and over again. You'll pay. You'll pay. You'll pay. You'll pay. You'll pay. You'll pay. She's so mad. She got showed up by this random dog. Somebody that was below her. Somebody that was below her in skill just got showed up. And I don't think they ever implied that she cried. They may have. Gina was afraid to interrupt her. The experience of losing to someone their age was new for Nina. Even worse, she hadn't lost with an ordinary sword. He heard they had fought with wooden practice swords with iron cores. It wasn't even a graceful defeat. Edis knocked her down, then jumped on top of her, then laid into her with both fists until Nina wet herself out of fear and pain. I forgot about that part. I totally forgot about that part. That was a humiliation. Oh my gosh. No defeat could have been more humiliating, and Nina had never experienced anything like that in front of everybody, in front of her peers, everybody that was respecting her, and women that were following her. Following that, Nina's assault on Edis began. In the beginning, she conspired with the other swordswomen to shun Edis. But this proved unsuccessful, as Edis didn't care about... Yep, they implied that too. They implied that before. But this proved unsuccessful, as Edis didn't care to be around them in the first place. Edis wanted to be strong, and didn't care one bit about internal dynamics of the Sword Sanctum. Yep. Where am I going to swing my sword next? Where I need a little space, that's all I care about. Then, one day, without a word to anyone, Nina suddenly disappeared. Yep, going to the academy. Though no one was worried about her, Nina had almost never left the Sword Sanctum and knew nothing about the world, but she was a sword saint. Maybe, people said, Edis kindled inside of her a desire to set out on a journey to grow stronger as a warrior. Rather than worry, many were impressed. Oh, that's great. A little side effect of her trying to look into this stuff. That's great. No, what would have been funny is we find out right here that Gino literally was following her the entire time. So it's one of those things go back to the anime and see if in the background, he's there watching her. I wonder if it isn't high time you went and got a look at the world out there yourself, Gino's father said to him. Slay a red dragon or two might wipe that slack jaw look off your face. His father sucks, dude. His father's an asshole, dude. Maybe I will, Gino thought. But he didn't actually go through with it. He'd never seen the outside world before, and it didn't especially interest him. Also, he was a little scared. You being huddled up in a location your entire life, yeah. They're almost kind of painting him in the realm of a shut-in or whatever, but it's sort of a different thing here. This is just their culture. He's always lived there. It's his village. Most of the adults of the Sword Sanctum knew something of the outside world, but their knowledge only extended to neighboring countries or countries where they lived. It was rare that someone had actually traveled the world. Sometimes those people told Gino their stories, but they were mostly just boasted. They'd vanquished such and such an opponent in such and such place. Yeah, again, this is a world where traveling is years. Even Galfalion himself traveling all the way down there to find Ghislaine, that was so many years of travel right there. There was only one who not only didn't boast, she told him about her failures, Ghislaine. You know it's going to be Ghislaine. She was the Sword King, Ghislaine de Dolia. She traveled the world as an adventurer, she told him, but had nearly been killed many times by her own stupidity. Even the greatest sword master can be killed. If you don't know magic or arithmetic, or at the very least, your letters, you'll be dead before you know it. That sounds like her, yep. Ghislaine said this with a look of utmost solemnity. So, Gino believed her. It's like gulp. It's like a gulp. Like the other children at the Sword Sanctum, Gino didn't know how to read, nor could he do arithmetic or magic. He felt no interest in learning them, only terror that with his sword alone, he wouldn't stand a chance. He had no desire to venture far. Yeah, again, I can see people like in our modern times and whatnot surviving very well if they kind of went out on their own, ran away from home, whatever. You're going to find some sort of resources or whatever. But again, in this world where you have like these massive gaps of space that you can easily get killed by monsters or straight starve to death. And again, without knowledge of the plants or what is edible or whatever, you're not going to live long. Being an adventurer is tough. The days went by and Gino did not go after Nina. Then, 2 months later, she returned. Gino asked her what had happened on her journey, but Nina wouldn't tell him anything. Got my ass kicked by a big multi-armed dude. Then watched him get one shot. However, something must have happened because Nina came back different. Yep. She stopped harassing Edis and became even more devoted to her sword. Her arrogant attitude faded away and she almost entirely stopped spending time with the other swordswomen. Nina also began to spend almost all of her free time on intensive training, if you called it that. She simulated endless bouts with Gino. They crossed swords over and over again. Actually, I thought this was going to turn into her spending more time with Edis and training harder. I thought that she was going to start neglecting Gino more. They crossed swords over and over again, scarcely speaking to each other, just fighting. Things continued in this way for some time, and it was during this period that Gino began to develop feelings for Nina. I don't think they ever implied that before. Again, because most of this was all Nina's perspective. It was all Edis's perspective, third person's perspective. It was never Gino's perspective. So we had really no idea of the feelings on the other side. He developed feelings for her. It was assumed because, again, when Nina finally confronted him about it, it was like, click, it happened. Many years went by before he realized he was in love. A lot happened in the meantime. North Emperor Aber came to them, as did Water God Rada. None of that held any interest for Gino. Nina, on the other hand, was different. After Edis kindled that spark in her, she rapidly grew stronger. Gino, as her partner for her intensive training, couldn't help but get stronger too. Yeah, kind of play off each other, feed into each other. Eventually he found it impossible to compete with her. She usually beaten him before, but the number of wins eked out now plummeted. Slowly, a yawning gap opened between them. That, in and of itself, didn't bother Gino. Losing to Nina came easy. Going from winning one bout in 5 to one bout in 10 wasn't such a massive change. It was funny though. He felt like she'd left him behind. Another reason to push for himself. If he likes her, and she's now overcoming him, the assumption is that eventually she's going to stop trying to train with him because she's not getting stronger by dueling him or training with him. That gap is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and if that gap suddenly becomes completely overpowering, you're no longer pushing forward. You're now at a standstill. You've learned all that you can from training with him. From his perspective, use your sword for yourself. That means I have to get stronger because what I want is to be able to train with her. Then one day, Edis, Nina, and Gino were summoned by the sword god Galfalion. He put the question to them of what differentiated a sword saint, a sword king, and a sword emperor. Then had them give their answer. Gino had absolutely no idea. Nina, on the other hand, gave a carefully considered reply. Edis, when told that her answer was wrong, insisted that she was right. The sword god accepted this. Then Nina and Edis fought. Whoever won, he declared, would be made a sword king. The battle went to Edis. Yep, we know that. While Nina sobbed, Edis was made a sword king. Gino felt something strange as he watched her cry. Seeing her massive loss, this would probably where the love finally clicks for him, maybe? Before he knew it, his fists were clenched and his mouth tightened into a thin line. He didn't recognize this emotion. He didn't know why he was feeling it. Nerves? Disappointment? Anger. Probably anger. He wondered why it wasn't him standing out there. Why hadn't he been granted the right to fight the other two? Okay, I can go that direction too. What would happen to him if he carried on like this? Getting left behind. I can see that. Not really anger. Disappointment, yeah, works on that one. Being left behind. And again, they were pointing that out earlier with him losing bouts to Nina. Eventually, she's going to leave him behind. Gino didn't know what to do with these feelings, but he did realize something. When he heard the sword god ask Nina, if I told you have to choose between marrying Gino and becoming a sword king, which would you pick? Gino had felt his face grow hot. That there was nothing he could pipe up with in denial. He'd fallen for her. Gino was a little different after that. He didn't start acting like a new man, and he continued to do the practice with his father. And his sword god assigned him as well the intensive training with Nina. On the outside, Edis's departure from the sword sanctum changed nothing for Gino. His bouts with Nina grew more advanced, but that was all. The change was internal. How he thought about these was new. He became much more motivated. Gotta chase after your girl. Get him, boy. Gotta chase after your girl. Get him, boy. Gotta get that cousin. Gotta get that cousin. He gave serious consideration to the point of their regular practice, as well as each individual technique, and began to experiment. The results were dramatic. In no time at all, he was on equal footing with Nina. Cool. He actually got on equal footing with her. That wasn't surprising. Gino had always had a gift, and his daily drills had given him a strong foundation. Nina changed too. After Edis departed the sword sanctum, Nina now was a sword king herself, started to frequent nearby villages and towns. Rather than simply improving her own sword skills, she applied herself to hunting monsters and teaching at the new training halls in the larger towns. Again, you're getting outside of the norm. She was stuck in sort of repetitiveness. Just keep training with these same people over and over again. She's now seeing what sort of, I think what made Edis unique and is probably trying to apply new things. Gino, meanwhile, stayed shut up in the sword sanctum. The outside world didn't scare him anymore, but he still had no interest in leaving. He couldn't say why. Did he need a reason to stay when there was no reason for him to leave? When Nina wasn't around, he devoted himself to practice, sometimes training by sparring with his sword emperor father. Despite his increased interest in training, he was no match for his father. Yeah, still a gap there. I don't know if they imply that he went straight from saint to god. I want to say that they imply that he got to king. Sword god Gao told him that he would be recognized as a sword king soon, but that was all. In terms of technique, he had already caught up to his father. The same was true for Nina, and probably Edis and Ghislaine, who were also sword kings. But he couldn't beat them. He was convinced he was missing some final step. Yeah, and to that earlier point, again, with Edis, they basically said, well, you can take on them and go even higher if you want to. She didn't want to. She didn't care about the titles. Once she got all the techniques she needed, she was fine. It kind of implied at some point Edis had achieved all the techniques, and everything beyond that was just power. It was speed. All this other stuff that would then make you achieve that title. What you did with those techniques. So yeah, it makes sense. In terms of techniques, he had already caught up to his father. He's got everything he needs. Beyond this point is overcoming them through brute strength and technique. Ghislaine, if she wanted to, could go even higher. But she doesn't care. Edis could go higher. Doesn't care. He was convinced that he was missing some final step. Though he knew what he needed in order to win, he didn't act on it. Interesting. That's an interesting statement. For all that he'd become more proactive, he still balked at throwing himself into unpleasant situations. Living sort of a comfort zone, question mark? Becoming too vicious? I can see that. You can become stronger, you just have to be more violent. He doesn't want to be violent? He tried to put himself in such situations in the past, but every time he thought, why is it important enough to suffer for? I guess, is that calling back to earlier, whenever he would beat somebody and they would then be angry at him? Sort of a performance anxiety? Why is it important enough to suffer for? No answer ever volunteered itself. During that time, Nina, who had come... Know this part. During that time, Nina, who had gone to see the coronation at the Oscar Kingdom, came back to the Sword Sanctum. Hey, Gino, she said. What do you say we get married? Without thinking much about it, Gino accepted. He just had the feeling that this would happen one day. After all, he had feelings for Nina. And there'd never been any sign that she was involved with any other man. With her unusual impetuousness, Nina took him back to her room, where they immediately went to bed. Damn, dude. It was the first time for both of them so the experience left a lot to be desired, but they were capable enough to keep each other preoccupied for the whole night. No, no delay. In a daze of giddy pleasure, Gino thought, I want more of this. Wield your sword for yourself, boy. That might have been the first time that he'd wanted anything so badly. The next day, Gino took Nina with him to see the sword god. He took Nina, not the other way around. It was a rare occurrence for Gino to take the initiative like that. But he wanted to marry her. No, the sword god immediately said. The sword god had never interfered with his daughter's upbringing before. But here, for the first time, he said no. I wonder why no. I would assume it's just an excuse to push him. Him wanting somebody stronger than Nina to take care of her. But again, like earlier, it said that he never really did much to interfere with her upbringing. Why would he suddenly care about her now? The reason was simple to him. Gino had no attractive qualities, not a scrap of independence, adventurous spirit, or ambition. Yeah, I can see that. He was a doormat who did what he was told. He had no spine. The sword god didn't know that they'd already spent the night together, but he figured that it had been Nina who had brought up the idea of marriage as well. Yeah, with him always literally being pulled around by her, the assumption is that she probably told him to do it. Gino had no desires of his own, nothing he was striving for, and he wanted to be married? Absurd. Still, it occurred to Gal that this might be a good turn of events. Yeah, wanting him to finally grow a spine. You want to marry her? Defeat me. I kind of want to start doing the voices now. This is such a vocal chapter, very third person, telling what happened, but I kind of want to start doing voices now. I miss doing Galfalion's voice. You want to marry her? Defeat me. Do that, and I'll give you permission. The sword god was trying to light the fire under Gino. He thought that throwing an obstacle in his path might motivate the boy a little. Ah, that's what it was, Gino thought. All along, it was this. It was that simple. It all made sense. What the sword god was always saying. What he was missing. And the source of his many doubts. The fog lifted, and he had it. The final step he'd been missing. He had purpose. Again, Galfalion told him, wield that sword for yourself, which is a canvas that you have opportunity and potential. Whereas before it's simply, get stronger. What's happening? How strong? There's no goal. He had the canvas set by Galfalion, and now he just drew something on it. He drew Nina, a goal. I accept. The rest was easy. Gino changed completely. He was a new man. He stopped doing the practice that he'd always been ordered to. He even stopped doing his intensive training with Nina. Was he slacking off? Not a chance. No, Gino started training on his own. For what he was doing, he didn't need a partner. Thanks to his intensive training with Nina, his practice with his father, and the many of the mock battles that he'd fought, he already had all the sparring practice he needed. Gino had theorized a way to win. Again, to earlier, he was good at theorizing stuff, good at thinking up tactics. He had a vision of a sure path to victory against the sword god. In order to realize that vision, he would have to work unbelievably hard, overcoming hardships and pain in the days ahead. That's why he hadn't done it before. Again, he doesn't like pain. He doesn't like to subject himself to stuff that just seems like it's pointless. There'd been no reason to. The frustrations and impatience for no reason would have been unbearable. But now, he had a purpose. He wanted Nina. Wanted her more than anything. He wanted her even if he had to suffer. Purpose transformed the hardship and pain into pleasure and anticipation. All that remained was to hone himself. He basically became Edis. He basically became Edis. I have to help Rudius. I have to stand at his side as an equal. I'm going to subject myself to years of pain just to stand at his side. In order to prove his theory, he had to condition his body to increase the speed and weight of his sword swing. They had so many words for it. Drills, intensive training, practice, and yet none of those would fit what Gino was doing. If he had to choose a word, he would have called it work. Gino calmly went about doing what he had to do, spending his days carrying out his work, in order to mold his body into the form that would allow him to defeat the sword god. And that's even more crazy. I mean, it's already crazy the idea that Edis was doing that. Edis was training herself for the sake of defeating Orsted. But again, I think they implied even before she went up against him, she knew that she couldn't beat him alone. It wasn't going to happen. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact if Sword God Galfalion couldn't defeat him, what am I going to do? It was really down to an idea of like, I need to give Rudius enough time to figure something out to take him down. Like, I am just a buffer. That's all I'm going to be able to do is be a buffer. Gino right here, for the sake of Nina, is trying to figure out a way to defeat that same very person, which is crazy to even consider. I'm going to defeat the Sword God. Most people would probably say, that's just never going to happen. It will never happen. He pushed himself to the very edge of his limits. His efforts would have made an ordinary man give up or physically break. But Gino could handle it. If he had any talent, that was it. He had his motivation, his plan he'd thought up over many hours, his flawless work, and that unbelievable perseverance that allowed him to tie them all together. These 4 elements joined to sharpen and hone his sword. The fateful day arrived. That morning, Gino got up, then went to the house of his childhood friend who lived next door to propose once more. They faced each other down, wooden swords raised. After totally demolishing Nina, he asked her to be his. She accepted. Then he went to meet the Sword God. It was afternoon, and right then, a mock duel was underway at the main training hall. It was a simulation of a real battle, the sort that was regularly held at the Sword Sanctum. These are not only a chance to show how one's technique had improved, but also a place where it is permitted for groups of 2 to challenge a higher-ranking opponent. Gino slipped casually back into the hall. As a Sword King, Gino had either gone up against 2 Sword Saints or Nina, who was the same rank as him, or he had teamed up with Nina to challenge the Sword Emperor. Nina wasn't there, in which case he would usually have automatically ended up fighting 2 Sword Saints. However, no sooner had Gino stepped into the center of the training hall than he pointed his sword at the Sword God. For a moment, the hall fell silent. Gino, what do you mean by this? Gino's father, Sword Emperor Timothy Britz, was on his feet before anyone else. He seized the wooden sword at his side and struck at Gino. Or, he tried. As he rose on one knee in preparation to stand, it shattered. At the same time, his sword arm was broken, sending the wooden sword clattering to the ground. His eyes bulged in astonishment. He was used to pain, so no other trace of it shone in his face. But he still broke out in a sweat. He saw Gino reach the end of his sword swing. Gino glanced at his father, then turned back to the Sword God. Sit down, Dad. It's like, sit down, Dad. You don't be a part of this. Interesting that I don't think they ever imply the fact that after all of his training, he ever faced his father again. So presumably this would be the first time that he faced his father after all his rigorous training. No, Dad. I've changed. Great Sword God. I've come to claim Nina's hand. He pointed his sword at the Sword God, as he did before. Sword God Galfalion took one look at the sword, then roared with laughter. Fine by me. Come at. Gino had already moved before Gal could finish. But Gal moved too, and faster. He'd already been ready in his stance. When the Sword Emperor had been knocked down, Gal had picked up the wooden sword from the floor, risen to a crouch, and shifted into a low stance, with his hand posed over his sword. It was a weaker position, but that was no disadvantage to Gal. No matter what stance he was in, his sword was faster than his opponent's. That was what made a Sword God. True, though, at any point, somebody next to him could want to claim his title. They sort of kind of played it out like, you come to this training hall, and in a lot of cases you'll have Galfalion there, and all these emperors next to him. Any one of those individuals, at any point, could go to attack him. And if I was him, I'd want them to regularly do that to prepare for something like this. At any point, anywhere else, somebody's going to want to claim his title, claim his head for that victory and that glory. And again, technically being one of the 7 great powers, you always have that bullseye on you at all times. Somehow, he couldn't swing faster than Gino, as the young man matched him with almost the same speed. When the 2 swords, moving at almost equivalent speeds, clashed, they met in the air slightly closer to Gino. There, the Sword God had the edge. He struck again, even more swiftly. But something was wrong. The way their swords had met had been, from the Sword God's perspective, close to perfect. The motto of the Sword God's style was one hit kill. So, if your strike was blocked, that meant you misplayed. But they also had another philosophy, which was to throw the enemy off balance with the first blow, in order to be sure of finishing them off with the next step. My assumption where this is going to go is that Gino's going to have more strength behind his attack. But that would be shocking. That would be shocking. No one could hit back at Galfalion after he seized the advantage with his first strike. That was how it always went. But Gino's sword struck with a weight that Gao had never felt before. There it is. And he maintained his balance. That wasn't to say that Gao lost his. They were evenly matched. Again, this is a guy that when Edis first faced him, blink of an eye, she was on her back outside the door. And it was like full battle aura. And he was holding back. No doubt he was holding back. It had been a long time since anyone had matched Gao blow for blow. Gao had leaned in further with his strike, so the next strike went differently. Gao's sword was fully extended, and it took him time to bring it back. Not Gino's. He was positioned so that he could parry Gao's blade, then immediately swing his sword back. Neither Gao nor Gino was off balance, and there was only a fraction of a second difference between them. Gino, with the precision of one threading a needle, had created that difference. Gao Falion did not strike a second blow. That day, Gino attained everything he'd ever wanted. Sword God Gino Brit. I like how it switched that. This next line literally starts with Sword God Gino Brits. He already won. He won right here. Sword God Gino Brits attained his dreams when he won Nina Falion. She was the sum total of all of his desires. Taking the title of the Sword God, marking him as the greatest swordsman alive, was no more than a bonus. So long as he lived, he never left the Sword Sanctum, and thus his name was the most obscure of all the sword gods. It was even rumored he was the weakest. Even the sword saints who trained under the former sword god treated him with disdain. Gino didn't begrudge that. Rumors meant nothing, for when opponents came to challenge him, he defeated them. They were just faceless opponents, sword fighters who came hoping to be the next sword god, or those who'd come to challenge the man they'd heard was the weakest sword god who ever lived. Gino crushed them all. Yeah, I was actually thinking that was actually to go back and actually say this is what actually happened, but it's just literally implying the idea that they both crossed blades, they didn't lose balance. Gao leaned in further with his strike, so the next strike went differently. Gao's sword was fully extended, and it took him time to bring it back. But Gino, no. He was positioned so that he could parry Gao's blade, then immediately swung his sword back. There was a fraction of a second difference between them. Then Gino, with precision of one threading a needle, had created that difference. Gao Falion did not strike a second blow. That's simple. Bam, went in. Second one got him. And again, true to the Sword God style, it is just so freaking fast. Whoever's the fastest. They were pretty equal at the beginning, but that second hit was what got him that win. I was hoping it would get more into detail, again, the idea of something specifically that he used to kind of be stuck on. Again, that whole idea of tactics and whatnot would be the defining factor, but they didn't really do that. Again, it just came down to finally having a purpose and being so driven by that purpose. Again, something that seemingly Gao lost at some point that both Edis and Gino Brits had. From the moment he became Sword God, he was undefeated. If he had left the Sword Sanctum, he might have even defeated such mighty foes as Water God Reda and Death God Randolph. But he didn't. He didn't care. Again, it all comes down to the idea of like titles and achieving things. It doesn't matter to a lot of these people. It seems like this was something in the past, but these people just don't care. The Sword Sanctum was his world, and he wanted nothing from outside of it. That being said, there was no denying that, after he became Sword God, the horizons of his world expanded. Many people, not just opponents, came to strengthen their bonds of friendship with Sword God Gino Brits. They didn't want to fight, and they instead asked him to instruct them in sword fighting or do business with them. One such visitor was Rudius Greyrat. He came one day without warning, with the all-too-familiar face of Berserker Sword King Edis at his side. Not only that, but he brought North God Kalman III and Dragon God Orsted as well. I love how later on it points out that the moment that he's seen all them, this boy came in here ready for a fight. He knew very damn well that we were possibly not going to be too happy about them. Y'all, like, it gets it really into the idea of how, like, smart Gino really is. Which does kind of make me a little bit disappointed in this first chapter, because I was, again, really hoping to get a lot more into, again, what exactly he did besides just training really hard. I thought that would be like a gimmick. There'd be some sort of method that he employed that really pushed that. Yes, it does technically imply the idea that he just literally got away from the usual. He was stuck in this pattern. He goes, I need something more. Let me go try something else. Let me get away from all these individuals and go do this one thing. And again, that could be applying what I was talking about earlier. Even as a child, he came up with somewhat outlandish battle theories. Again, that could go into play there, but it was still a good chapter. Really good to kind of see how he got to the point that he did. Yes, it did technically come down to what I was sort of afraid of is the power of love. It's just simply that. But it did paint that interesting look. I like the idea of going from train to be strong to train for yourself, which again creates the canvas in which you can paint upon, which he draws the one that he loves. And that's, in a lot of cases for a lot of people, simply all you really need. But anyways, let's get into chapter 2 in the Ephemeral Hall. On that day, Rudius visited the Sword Sanctum's training hall. Called the Ephemeral Hall, Alec was on his right, smiling and not giving off the slightest hint of hostility. At his waist, he had a two-handed sword the Ore God himself had forged from the black stone that Rudius created. Cool. It didn't have any special powers, but as expected from the Ore God, it was a fine blade. Interesting. So the Ore God himself made it, but additionally the idea of it not having special powers. Again, it's just made from stone that Rudius had versus what he had before, which is Kajaku, was made from, like, the bones of a demon. So it's like, it doesn't have, like, a magical attribute to it. It's simply just this, which is seemingly probably what he wants, to not rely on that power, which is similar to what his father did. I wonder if that was purpose. Alec had taken a liking to the nearly 2-meter blade and now carried it regularly. Orsted was on Rudius's left. He kept his black helmet on and didn't say a word. He stood so perfectly still that you might mistake him for a photo cutout. Rudius had expected a fly to land on him, but he was so intimidating that even a mosquito wouldn't have tried. I wonder about that. The idea that his curse makes it to where he never gets bit by mosquitoes. OP. That's OP. The other people here weren't looking at Rudius, Alec, or Orsted. Their gazes were fixed on Edis in front of them. She was standing with a wooden practice sword in her hand. Her expression was serious, and she didn't seem angry. No, she's having fun. But anyone could see how tightly she gripped her sword. Edis, in the center of the Ephemeral Hall, at her feet lay a sword saint with a broken wrist. "I yield," they muttered at last, looking bitter. They got on their feet, bowed, and without waiting for Edis to respond, went back to the side of the hall. At the side of the hall stood a whole row of Sword God warriors, about 20. They were all lined up, wanting to get their revenge. It sure was a small world, considering all of them were sword saints. Like a whole world crammed into a small space. Across from Edis sat a young man and woman. The man was probably the same age as Rudius, though, by that measure, Rudius wasn't sure that he could be called young or not. But many of the sword saints were in their 30s and 40s. He had his arm around a woman sitting beside him, know who that is, and compared to the other sword saints, he seemed relaxed, even with Orsted in front of him. Orsted was still Orsted, even with the helmet reducing the effect of his curse. And this guy was relaxed. Nothing less from the sword god, Gino Britz. It does make you kind of wonder again, because they imply later on that they came here ready. Rudius came with Alec and Orsted. They were ready for something. And yet to be that calm. It implies that he's at least confident that Rudius is not there as an aggressor. As he radiated authority, with a girl hanging onto his arm, Rudius had a hard time believing that he was the same age as him. At the very least, Rudius could never face Orsted while putting his arm around his wife and running his hand down her back. He get punched for that. By Edis mostly. I get a little respect for Gino and his ability to flaunt his wife in front of Orsted like that and not be like nerve-wrecked. Not that he minded the sight of Edis smacking him when he reached for her breast now and then. The woman's name was Nina, and she was a friend of Edis's, who held the rank of Sword Emperor. Did she get that given to her because of who her husband is? Did she get that handed to her, or did she earn that? I think she could have earned it. She was getting up there. She was getting very talented. Again, Edis could have achieved it if she went for it. I wouldn't have doubt that Edis right now is at least Emperor. However, she wasn't giving off Sword Emperor energy. Instead, she was leaning happily against her husband, Gino, and only smacking him whenever he ventured to her chest. It was like he didn't even see Rudius and his party. They were disgustingly in love. Rudius getting jealous. At this point, we should get into how we ended up in this tense situation. Previously on Mushoku Tensei. Sorry, I had to do it. Gather round, girls and boys. My name is Rudius Greyrat. Let's have some fun. Today, we were visiting the hottest and coolest sightseeing spot in the northern continent, the Sword Sanctum. Thinking about the future, I needed to have a talk with a sword god. Plus, there was Edis's history with the former sword god to contend with. Thus, I decided to go pay my respects and set the record straight, so to speak. I didn't get to talk to the current sword god last time, so this was my official visit. Along with me on the trip was, you guessed it, Edis. From what I knew from the sword god style, its practitioners tend to be the type to slice you up first, then ask questions later. I thought it'd be best to bring as few magicians as possible, same as last time. And bring Orsted in case you get cut in half. I was sure they were all people of good moral character, of course, but Edis had since killed Galfalion in the Beryl Kingdom, and he'd been the current sword god's father-in-law. What do you think? After that, could I waltz up and ask him favor? Admittedly, depending on the atmosphere there, I was prepared to go home without raising the subject. Anything could happen. That's why I planned for just the two of us to go. At least, that was my plan. But there was a shocking twist in store. When I said I was heading to the Sword Sanctum, Orsted said he'd come along with a real air of significance. That significance was probably that he was worried that I'd run my mouth off and make the sword god angry. In other words, he was coming in case I botched it. Interesting? Why would Orsted want to go? Could he feel that based on previous loops that Gino could possibly attack Rudius because of what happened with Sword God Galfalion? And again, that could kind of fall into the realm of him not having in previous loops the idea of Edis's connection to Nina. And that could be the big thing here. The reason why Gino is standing down and why Nina isn't furious is because it was Edis. And Orsted doesn't know that. Either way, I had no reason to say no, so I agreed. Orsted was a reassuring guy to have around. Yeah, I would always, if I could always have Orsted around, I'm bringing him with me. Since Orsted was going, Alec insisted on going too. I love moments like this, where I make this criticism. I make a criticism of the fact that they're still making the teleportation circles in the office like before, not learning from the previous mistake. And everybody's like, well, but that's because Orsted's there and because Alec's there. They're not there right now. Like, it's like, I'm joking most of the time, but at the same time, don't make up something that it's not that they're, like, being dumb about it, Andrew, because Orsted or Alex, they're not. It's completely unguarded right now. Since Orsted was going, Alec insisted on going too. You know, the guy who's just a bit too obsessed with becoming a hero, who'd proven that he's just as bad at reading a room as Cliff had been back in the day. Yeah, that Alec. I'm sorry, I enjoyed reading this in first person, so I didn't want to change it. Personally, I'd have liked to say, sorry, can't have anyone who's going to cause trouble. I was grateful to Alec for looking after Sig so often, but that was a whole nother matter. Sir Orsted said, as you please. Thus, it was decided. Damn it! Orsted! Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Edis, Orsted, Alec, and I would go to the Sword Sanctum together. So, we went. When we arrived, the peaceful sight of the country village, blanketed in snow, welcomed us. I had some jitters, but I'd been here before, and this time, I had 3 reliable companions with me. So you weren't hiding behind Edis the entire time? Like last time, you were just hiding behind Edis the entire walk into the village? What a great view. They sure have a great selection of swords for a country village. Oh, I spotted our first villager. Shivering beside my stoic companions, I carried on a conversation with myself, right up until we arrived at the Sword God's main training hall. A group of smiling sword saints showed us to the ephemeral hall. Everyone was pleased, and the atmosphere seemed friendly. Yet, for some reason, I had this prickling sensation down my spine. It's all in your head, I told myself. Focus on the sword god. Just then, one of the sword saints spoke. If it's all right, I would first like to see the sword of the Berserker Sword King Edis, who's slain the former sword god. How's this for hello? Before I could even turn around, the sword god shrugged. Whatever you like. All hell broke loose after that. Okay, that's it for the first person. And it was fun. It was fun. Still smiling but radiating hostility from behind their eyes, the sword saints moved to challenge Edis. They looked friendly, and they were using practice swords, but Rudius could see their ill intent. They'd used the wooden swords to beat Edis to death under the pretense of practice. It was obvious at a glance that they wouldn't hold back. But then, Edis was still technically of the sword god style. It would take more than a few sword saints to get the better of her. She easily turned the tables on her would-be attackers, and she beat down one, then another. The sword saints' smiles turned to hateful snarls. They weren't hiding their malice anymore. In the middle of all this, only one person looked totally serene. Gino. Even Nina looked a bit troubled by the murder in the sword saint's eyes. But it was clear from Gino's face that he couldn't have cared less. There's almost like an element about this whole situation where this is like therapeutic for them. Because again, what would have presumably happened here, and they kind of imply later on, once Gino took over, Sword God Galfalion left. And it seems like some people weren't happy about that. But things continued on. The place stayed the same. Things moved forward. But then they find out that Galfalion dies, and they were wanting badly for some revenge. This is a guy that trained them. A guy they looked up to for so many years, he's been killed. And it implies that Gino didn't care. I have what I want. I'm happy. He went off and did his own thing, and he got himself killed. But now that finally Edis shows up, they're like, thank goodness. Please get it out of your system. Get all this bickering out of your system. And I love how they get more into it later on. How he puts it is so good. Rudeus did his best to put on a cheerful face and explain what was going on. For all the good that did, his stomach hurt, wondering how it came to this. He had a feeling he'd screwed up. With the vibe in here, it was a lost cause. He just wanted a chance to explain, but any chance at conversation was totally shot now. Before Gino can say he'd allow it, Edis had already jumped forward without hesitation. More Sword Saints were waiting at the center of the hall. One after another, they stepped forward and Edis took him down. It was like a whack-a-mole. Why these saints think that they can take her down is the more puzzling thing. They just want to wear her down so that Gino can take them down, really. Probably what it is. Finally, she was down to the last one. Sword God Gino would be next. For now, he was sitting above it all. But if his people were taken down, he'd have no choice but to step forward himself. Yep, bad read there, Rudeus. Another bad read, Rudeus. The Sword Saints were probably anticipating that moment. When then the Sword God struck the red-haired swordswoman dead. They wanted revenge against the one who killed the former Sword God. They'd basically declared they were itching for it. This was a prelude to an execution. Rudeus was regretting his choices. Maybe coming here was a bad idea. Again, if I was Gino, even if I want a revenge, Dragon God Orsted and the North God? No. Like, putting aside Edis, who is, again, I think Emperor, at least at this point, putting aside them, you have Dragon God and the North God. And you have Rudeus, who is a big, massive question mark for him, who I think they imply later on, knows at this point that he's one of the 7 great powers. Hell no. You have 3 of the 7 great powers literally right in front of you. No. Even Edis wouldn't leave a bout with the Sword God unscathed, and there was no way that Rudeus could fight him at this range. At least things weren't all bad. Rudeus' reflexes might be slow, but Orsted and Alec would stop the Sword God's blade for him. Edis might get scratched up a bit, but as long as she was alive, Rudeus wouldn't complain. Edis was ready for whatever happened. Either way, Rudeus was grateful that they had come with him. Yeah, as long as her head's still attached, I think we can still heal her. The only thing was, if he interfered in a duel between Edis and the Sword God, negotiations would be out of the question. He wasn't sure exactly what would happen, but whatever it was, he could already feel the stomach ache coming on. He had to figure out some way to stop this and get in the position to talk. That was his job here. Just then, the last Sword Saint fell. Just like the last one, he clutched his wrist. They'd all been holding their wrists. For some reason, it was the left, and some the right, but Edis hadn't bothered switching up techniques. No wonder they were extra furious. She's not even bothering changing things up. It's like, it's literally like a factory coming in. Same technique, same technique, same technique, same technique. Probably just depending on which hand they use or whatever. She knows these Sword Saints and what their limits are. Was Nina next? She didn't look like she was moving anytime soon. Maybe the Sword God. When he made his move, Rudeus would make his. He used the art of Go no Sen, swoop in as he went to stand and make conversation. Done. The Sword God Gino Britt's tone was breezy amid the crackling tension. Now, what was it that you came to see me about? Rudeus was shocked. It sounded like he'd hear him out right before the fight. It wasn't very Sword God style, but it suited Rudeus. It's like, yeah, please let me talk first. First, I'd like to apologize. For what? The previous Sword God. As Rudeus stated this, there was a shift around the Sword Saints, as though they'd finally gotten what they'd been asking for. They'd get their chance for revenge. Rudeus wondered if he shouldn't have been so direct. But it would have ended the same way. There was no avoiding the truth. The Sword God had a dubious look on his face. Seeing it made Rudeus hesitate too. Had he said something strange? He almost started glancing around nervously. Then, Gino nodded with an air of understanding. Now that you mention it, Nina said something ages ago about helping you, I think. I suppose if you kill the father of an ally, you have to apologize, huh? He sounded like it had nothing to do with him at all. The Sword Saint looked more shocked than Rudius. Yeah, here's the big question mark that I have. Gino doesn't care. Again, for Gino, Galfalion, I would assume that he respected him somewhat. It didn't give much of a sense in the first chapter that, like, he liked Galfalion or that he revered him or respected him. Galfalion was just the sword god, and every now and then he trained him. But then at some point, he became an obstacle that he had to train to overcome. But again, never implied that he had some sort of connection to him. So I don't really think that he cares what happens to Galfalion. I don't think it shook him up at all. The question mark for me is Nina. The question mark is Nina. And again, by all accounts from the chapters where it got into the Sword Sanctum early on, there was only the very brief moment at the very end of all those stories where it finally implied that there was a father there. So I don't even think that Nina cares. I really do believe that she doesn't care either. So for Gino, it just merely goes to, yeah, I think she said something about her working with you, so I guess you should apologize. I guess you may have broken a promise there, so I guess it makes sense that you're apologizing. What else? Shrug? He sounded like it had nothing to do with him at all. The Sword Saints looked more shocked than Rudius. But my master, that is, the previous sword god Galfalion, he went to fight you on his own free will, right? If anything, shouldn't we be the ones apologizing? If this concerns all the sword god style, and he attacked you, then we're the ones who broke the agreement. What's going on with that anyways? I don't know anything about it. Again, it literally concerns him not at the least bit. It's like, he made that decision. He went and did that. I guess technically if it concerns the sword god style as a whole, then I guess so. But that would have been like, I guess a choice from the previous sword god style, like the previous rulership of this group, so to speak, or the style itself. I don't know anything about that. I mean, what are you here for? Rudius would have liked to ask him what was going on. Was this really the top guy of the sword god style? He expected someone more unwilling to listen to reason. Yeah, this is what Rudius is used to. Rudius is used to Edis. He's used to Galfalion. Technically, all these damn styles, they're all freaking crazy. Along the lines of Etofe. This guy was maybe a little too chill. It's a strange feeling. More like we were talking to someone of the North God style. Etofe excluded, of course. Like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, who of the North God style was, like, not crazy or eccentric? I guess, technically, Aber, I guess, was pretty chill most of the time. But I would assume what Rudius is referring to here is probably Alex Sander. Like, that guy seems pretty level-headed. That was just a conversation between Nina and Edis. It was before any formal agreement was reached. I actually came here once before, but was told that you were otherwise engaged. So I left again. I thought Nina would have mentioned it to you. I did. But it hasn't come up since. I never heard anything about standing up against the Dragon God Orsted. But that being said, if he fought you... Gino's eyes narrowed. It sounds like my predecessor opposed you. The fervor in the Sword Saints mounted. You could practically hear them thinking now it was time to draw their swords. Wait, if you just calm down. Gino raised his eyebrow. Do I look upset to you? Again, poor Rudius is completely misreading this. Like, even Nina is like, I did mention it, but it hasn't come up since. Like, Nina right here is not even saying, kill them, they killed my dad. They don't care. Only the Saints do. And I do feel that for Rudius. Like, he's literally sitting there, and there's literally all these Sword Saints at this range could probably kill Rudius in an instant. He has a bunch of people that could literally sort of light him and kill him instantly. Because if I remember correctly, sort of light was required to become Sword Saint. So they at least have the ability to instantly slice, like a blink of an eye. They all want Rudius dead. Gino and Nina presumably don't at this point, but them do. I would be very nervous sitting there. I'd be very nervous. Not at all. You're the very picture of calm. Look, the thing is, we came here to apologize and to ensure that you and I don't stay enemies. A hostile relationship with powerful warriors of the Sword God style isn't what we want at all. We like to be on friendly terms with powerful people. We're here to offer friendship to you. We can offer help with distribution channels for swords and food supplies, infrastructure maintenance, and even construction. Conversely, if you stand against us, we can cut those things off. It'll be bad all around, right? Why put a threat at the end? Why now put a threat at the end? Yes, you can do that later, but why do it here? Dude does not know how to play good cop, bad cop. After he finished blurting all this out, Gino sighed. He might have gone on a touch too long. Given that he'd been imagining etoffe, he ought to have trimmed it down. But this guy didn't seem so simple that he'd turn around and say, sure, I'll be your ally, just because he got him a really rare bottle of wine. No, I think the problem is that you ended it with saying, we can cut off those supplies. If you join us, we'll give you things, but go against us and we'll cut you off. Now, it does leave open the door to neutrality, but it's still a threat. Gino regarded him, then spoke. Do I have to spell it out for you to understand? My predecessor didn't say anything to me about a grudge. That said, his decision to fight you wasn't on behalf of the Sword God style. It was personal. It has nothing to do with us, and so I have no interest in fighting you. This is more important to me than that. As he said this, he pulled Nina closer and buried his face in her hair. Again, I like this. I like this very level-headedness. He went to you on a personal grudge, and we all knew that. He wanted to get his revenge on Orsted. That's why he was doing it. He wanted Orsted. It had nothing to do with the Sword God style. He wasn't coming there and he stood before Rudeus and said, I will take you down for the fate of the Sword God style. No. He just wanted this fight again. It has nothing to do with us. If Gino went up against them to get revenge for Galfalion, he'd be sacrificing that entire style and the Sword Sanctum for the sake of some stupid personal grudge. No. That's what the stupid Sword Saints want because they're not level-headed. Nina's cheeks went pink, and she didn't stop him. Reese got that he had the hots for her, but he probably shouldn't do that in public. Edis was bright red too, her eyes popping out of her head. She also had her arms folded and her feet planted apart, like she was ready to fight. Was this seriously the Sword God they were talking to? His intelligent answers were freaking Reus out. He's like, be more crazy! Be more crazy! High-ranked Sword God style practitioners were more the sort to shout irrationally and fight. Scratch that. That was just etoffe. No, the North God style. But they were pretty much the same. Maybe this guy in front of him was a body double, like someone from the office in charge of diplomatic relations. Okay. Regardless, Rudeus was grateful that he felt that way, even if it was odd that he was unconcerned by one of his relatives getting killed. Maybe he considered the situation and decided to prioritize his future over his own feelings. Both. There is an oddity here that he doesn't care about his uncle, doesn't care about his bride's father's killer being in that room, but there's a problem that Rudeus views it in his own eyes. I care about my father. I would care about my uncle. I would care about my relative being killed and the killer being before me. But again, Galfalion was so seemingly disconnected from them as a family. He was just so caught up in his past failure and disconnected himself from his family. It didn't seem like he was much of a father. Wasn't much of a relative. Wasn't much family. But yeah, he's more concerned about what's right next to him and in her belly. They already imply that she's pregnant. I would assume by now that she's already had the child. But this is his family now. This made sense to Rudeus. He bet Gino thought things over and made his mind up a long time ago. In that case, allow us to... Hold on, shouted one of the Sword Saints, jumping to his feet. He was red in the face and pointing at Orsted. All of us revere the old Sword God. Through watching him wield his sword, he learned, studied, and grew stronger. And they killed him. These people right here, are we supposed to stand by? They killed the man we owe everything to. Do you want to make the Sword God style a laughing stock? All right, go on then. Gino said this without missing a beat. Go fetch a real sword. I'll watch you. The Sword Saint froze. What? I'm sure they came here ready to fight. Look, that's the Berserker Sword King, Edis, Dragon God Orsted, and North God Kalman III. With Rudeus Grey Rat behind them to support them with magic, even if all of you attacked at once, they'd wipe you out before you landed a single blow. But, come on, get to it. I'll make sure your body is well taken care of, and I'll give you a funeral. I can't say your deaths will do anything to preserve the honor of the Sword God style, but I'm sure your corpses will be satisfied. He's like walk up there, thwack. Shut up, boy. Go ahead. Go ahead. I ain't doing it for you. Go ahead. Satisfy your urge. See where it gets ya. You'll achieve something, I guess. I don't know. Maybe you'll make the hair on their head like briefly move by just forcing them to have to strike you, and the wind gusts their hair. You might cause one of their hair follicles to fall out. What'd you earn? What'd you earn? He knows full well Ruiz didn't come there like an idiot. Now, he was almost going to, because let's be honest, Ruiz was going to come there with just Edis, so it technically is a good thing that Orsted came with him. And again, maybe Orsted's seen that. Maybe Orsted's seen that having some sort of power there will make him listen better to reason. That he might possibly have done something if he didn't see that there was some sort of force to sort of kind of flex at him, but he just completely smacked this dude down. The Sword Saint stood there in silence for a moment after this, then sat back down, fist shaking with repressed frustration. Then he said in a trembling voice, "Do we have no choice but to follow them without avenging the old sword god? That's what I'm telling you. If you don't like it, go get your sword. I'm not going to force anything on any one of you. Do what you like, just like my father and the others." Gino sounded tired of this. Ruiz liked the idea of quickly bringing them around, rather than letting any grudges fester, though it seemed harsh for that to be the matter of life and death. Just then, Edis spoke up. "All the Sword Emperors are gone, huh?" Gino shifted his face to her. "My father left the Sword Sanctum, along with the others. It seems they were displeased by me becoming the Sword God." Interesting. Again, he alluded to that earlier. The idea of, do what you like, just like my father and the others. Again, it seems to imply that he took over, he struck down Galfalion. Galfalion immediately left, went off and licked his wounds, went off pouting, and the moment that he left, nobody liked that he won and took over. And they may have tried to take him on. They may have tried, but they probably assumed if he just struck down him, there ain't no way that we can do it. But it's odd that they all left. Even his father, again, his father that he struck down and showed directly, gave him a first-hand example, struck down his father, they all left. Why wouldn't his father stay? That seems weird. Why wouldn't his father be proud? It reeks of pride. It literally reeks of pride, which really does show how broken the Sword God style was at this point. That everybody was so dead set on Galfalion leads it. Galfalion is a sword god, and they probably were so stuck in that being the norm that they couldn't see any other way. Which does lead you to believe that they would put forth this hierarchy of this business over who truly was stronger. Which is no shock, right? Because Gino showed that he was stronger, and the business fell apart. Why would they not support Gino the moment he took down Galfalion? Pride. Gino showed up his father. Showed up the one he looked up to as being the best swordsman. And he couldn't accept the change of guard. No, this isn't how our place was. It's always been this way, and it will always be this way. Walking away. And it seems to imply that it didn't stop there. That these other sword saints probably wanted to leave too. Didn't like that Gino got that position, but they couldn't strike him down. And now, as they're trying to get Gino to get the revenge for their god, he's going, do whatever the hell you want to do. Just like my father and the rest of them did. All the emperors left. All that's left behind is Nina, who had seemed to have achieved emperor, and all the sword saints in lower. There's no kings, no other emperors, nothing. This explains what Nina was talking about back when Ruiz last visited. It turned chaotic the moment that he struck down Galfalion because their structure got destroyed. Apparently, that didn't include Nina. Gino's phrasing suggested that they were talking about the two sword emperors who'd been direct disciples of the previous sword god. Now that Edis said it, Ruiz realized that he couldn't see anyone who fit the bill. I expect that by now, they'll be starting their own training halls in Osra and Milis. Or perhaps the King Dragon Kingdom. I mean, I suppose I could have left too. Gino shrugged. Anyways, did you just come to apologize? It was nice of you to do that, but I'm honestly not sure why you bothered. Yeah, I guess he could have left too, but why? Why bother? If this is home, I don't care. Reese felt like he was being a bit too cold, philosophical, or just bizarre. No, there's more.
It's a long story, but we're actually fighting against a being called the Man God. Reese laid out the details of their battle with the Man God. All else aside, Gino seemed like a guy that could be reasoned with. If they could come to an agreement without any bloodshed, all the better. It felt anticlimactic, but that was fine. Once Reese stopped looking at him through the sword god-colored glasses, Gino was a nice young man with a good head on his shoulders. After securing his cooperation, they could sit down and have tea together. He may stop seeming so creepy then. In conclusion, I'd like to formally request the cooperation of the Sword God School in our future endeavors. I decline. I will not work with you. There was an O from the Sword Saints, but they looked as confused as Rudius. So, you're going to side with the Man God then? No, I won't work against you either. You mean you're staying neutral? May I ask why? I mean to stay true to my master's teaching. What teaching? The master always said to be strong for your own sake. Honestly, I didn't understand what he meant for a long time. I doubt anyone here did. Even the Sword Emperors, like my father, didn't get it. When I realized I wanted Nina, it became clear to me. A sword is something you wield for yourself, purely for the sake of fulfilling your own purpose. Nothing else. Yeah, I can see him, based on the other emperors leaving, his own father leaving, that their purpose for that sword wasn't their own. Again, the sword sanctum was Galfalian's. This world that we created, this little kingdom that we had, and the moment that he was dethroned, it's like my kingdom disappeared. You weren't swinging the sword for your own purpose. Again, his father said swing the sword for your own strength. So the assumption there would be what he got out of what Galfalian said was, well, I want strength, so I guess swing your sword for your strength, boy. He didn't understand what it actually meant. Having a purpose, something to fulfill. Gino spoke rapidly and fluently, and there was conviction in his voice that said that he believed in the unshakable truth of its wisdom. Because of this, I will not work with you. I wield my sword for myself only. Everything I do for myself. Even if your family were in danger, you wouldn't pick up your sword? I would. If I loved them, I would. Then, for the first time, Gino looked straight at Rudius. His gaze was strong and commanding. Nothing like what Edis described. Or, are you saying you'll kill my family if I refuse to work with you? A chill fell over the training hall. Gino's voice was as cold as ice and borderline murderous. You gotta choose your words carefully, Rudius. Rudius felt a cold sweat break out over his body. If he had been alone, he probably would have wet himself. This was a sword god, the one who'd taken the title after defeating Falion in an instant. A weird guy, but one of the world's best swordsmen, a power to be reckoned with. No, I love my family too. Oh, I'm relieved to hear that. The murderous note faded from his voice. It seems you're everything I heard you were, Rudius. What have people told you? That you became the Dragon God's follower for the sake of your family, and that you laid a whole country to waste. That's true, broadly speaking. I didn't lay any countries to waste, though. You have more nerve than I expected. Gino's gaze flickered to either side of Rudius, to Edis, Alec, and the Sword Saints. All of them had their hands their swords, some of them already drawn. Rudius turned back to look behind himself, but saw that Orsid hadn't so much as twitched. In other words, you're a man I can trust. It is because you're such a man that I feel safe in saying that I will not work with you. My sword fights for me and those I love, and no one else. Oh, all right. I like that. Respect. Respect. It's not that I don't like you. I respect you, and I can trust you, but it's because I trust you, I can say I will not work with you. Because anybody else that came to my door, a kingdom come to my door, and said, you will work with me. Are you going to work with me? They would then threaten. But because he trusts Rudius, he knows that he can decline him and they can stay neutral. He knows he can remain neutral. But again, the biggest point is that my sword fights for no one but the ones I love. I'm not going to go charge off with you for whatever war that you have. I don't want to be a pawn of a kingdom, which is essentially what Rudius is. Yes, the Orsa Corporation is not like, Melis or Asra, but they are technically a nation in itself. They have a leadership and an army. I don't want to fight for your kingdom. I want to fight for the ones I love. And Rudius should take heart knowing this guy's willing to say, I trust you enough to say no. Rudius understood Gino Britz better now. Gino just wanted to protect the people he loved with his own hands, much like Rudius. Rudius failed to do so and threw himself at Orsid's mercy instead. But he was sure that Gino could pull it off. What's more, he wasn't wrong. He just didn't seem motivated to do anything else. Of course, he was still the sword god. Even if he declared his neutrality, that wouldn't stop enemies from coming to him. But it seemed he didn't have it in him to go make more. Yeah, it seems like this is leaving the door open to it's less likely that he's going to go off and run and join somebody else against Rudius. Unless somebody whispers in his ear that his family's in danger because of Rudius. Rius wasn't sure why he didn't include the previous sword god amongst the people he loved, but maybe that was different. That man had lived and died on his own terms. Gino didn't seem to object to that. Yeah, if that's how you want to go down, that's how you're going to go down. Rius couldn't see how else he was going to sell this. Gino was complete with himself. Unless they gave up on fighting the man god, or he felt he couldn't protect his family through his strength alone, he wouldn't change his mind. He'd made his decision and couldn't be moved. It was just as you expected from the top dog of the Sword God School. Yeah, simple enough. Simple enough. He's got what he wants. There's no point in going out and getting anything else. Okay, in that case, at least be careful if the man god appears in your dreams. He'll lie, saying it's all for your family, but if you listen, you'll lose everything. I understand. Rius didn't want to, but it was time to back down. Gino wasn't going to work against them, so that was something. He wouldn't be their ally, but Rius also hadn't made an enemy. After learning the kind of man he was, Rius took him at his word, and he seemed to trust him enough to be honest. Yeah. I can see any other person coming in that room, Gino probably wouldn't even give him the time of day, or at least explain that much, get into that much detail, and get that personal. If I die and someone else takes my place, be sure to come back. This is no more than my personal decision, you see. True. True. Again, because it seems like the previous setup was much different, and that's what seems to be agitating them all. Thanks, I'll do that. Rius turned back to look at Orsted, not knowing what was going on under his helmet. Does it work for you, Orsted? He nodded slowly. It does. Once that was over, Rius healed up the Sword Saints. Things moved on to training sessions with Alec. That meant that Rudius was seated at the front of the training hall in the place of honor, watching as Alec sparred freestyle with the Sword Saints. The Sword Saints only had practiced swords, but they were clearly fighting to kill. Rudius bet that they thought that they could get away with it if they killed Alec in the heat of training. Which is funny because Alec was at his side during the Brahil Kingdom fight. He didn't kill Sword God Galfalion, but again, he's at Rudius' side now. Alec brushed them off without any trouble. Having said that, maybe because they were Sword Saints, or maybe because he was distracted, some of them did occasionally get a hit on him with a Sword of Light. In the end, though, their swords were still only wood. The moment they hit, the wood splintered, and Alec took 0 damage. That battle aura was too OP. Yeah, there is a side of this whole situation where Alec, unlike Edis, is the type that he can take hits, and they do take hits. Again, having the blood that he has, they're more allowing of that stuff. Atafe was kind of the same way. They used unusual practice swords at the Sword Sanctum. It seemed they had a core of something like iron to give them something closer to the correct weight. Without battle aura, a hit in the wrong place would probably be enough to kill. That explained why there were only Sword Saints here. Only the advanced tier and above could call in a battle aura. That's interesting to note there, because they implied before, when they fought Edis, they purposely used it with an iron core to get the edge on her. That it was a trick they used. But no, right here it seems like this is normal. So I wonder if that was a misread back there. I wonder if that was a misread. Because that makes sense why there's only Sword Saints in here, is because those people won't die to these swords, and these swords were needed to have a core in them to train you like you're using a real sword. Interesting. Rudius whispered to Orsted beside him. By the way, Sir Orsted, why'd you come with me? I wish to get a look at Gino Britz. You mean, what's different about him than usual? Indeed. Gino silently watched them spar, with Nina at his side like always. Beside her sat Edis, and the two of them were talking about something. Every now and then, Rudius heard the name Galfalion, and assumed they were talking about the death of the previous sword god. Yeah, that's great to have Edis at least tell her about what happened. Give her that closure. Tell him that he died fighting, doing what he wanted to do. But yeah, I can see this being the reason why Orsted came here. He wanted to see how this loop's Gino is so different than the other ones. Because again, this is the one that's the most curious to Orsted, that everything is just changing and is just broken. What do you think? He is unchanged. He is single-mindedly abstinent in his determination to live only for himself. Huh. As a child, Gino was unstable, liable to be swayed by the man god's words. Now, from what I've seen here, we need not be concerned. All right. Good point. Again, because before, when we learned about his childhood, he had no purpose. He was just doing whatever his family said. Swing a sword, swing a sword, swing a sword, swing a sword. No purpose to his life. Easily swayed by the man god. But because things have been so wrecked by Rudius being present in this world, and so many people around Gino especially that have been altered, again, Edis going up there, interacting with Nina, Things are going to change here. I need to make sure that he's found some sort of purpose. He did. Good. He won't be an enemy. Depending on how you thought about it, a neutral party who was an enemy was sort of an ally. Gino wouldn't help them prepare for the future, but it wasn't like the other nations were putting all their energy into that either. True. Pretty much everybody's kind of a neutral party. They just say they're on your side. The important thing was that he wouldn't become a pawn of the man god. Of course, he might still turn against them, whether they wanted to or not. But once you started thinking like that, there was no end to it. Yeah. The what ifs are endless. Anybody that says they're ally right now could easily turn on you. A sword saint went down, then another got straight up, and went to the center of the hall. Next thing Marius knew, all the sword saints were either sitting or sprawled out on the ground. North God Kalman III was something else. There was a lull in the noise that filled the hall. Then, right at the end, he said, "The strong live free," as his voice rang out clearly through the silence. She looked up, taken aback by the sound of her own voice. Her mouth immediately formed a tight line, as she glared threateningly at the sword saints, who drew closer to her. They looked down, muttering and shooting glances at Gino. Reese heard comments like, "Making his apprentices fight his battles," and "Does he even care about the honor of the sword god style?" They're still stuck on it, even after saying that earlier. Gino's expression was unconcerned as ever. For all Rudius knew, Gino heard stuff like this every day. Yeah, again, back there, when Nina was talking about that it was in chaos. Things were crazy. Even Edis herself noted the place felt off. "Won't you join our training, sword god?" One of the sword saints asked, taking advantage of Gino's silence. The man, who had a massive bruise spreading across his face, was the one who'd first challenged Alec. He was also the one who asked Gino to hold on earlier. "No, I'm fine here." "Why?" "Why would I? I asked him to train with you because you requested it of me. If you've all had enough, then that's that." The sword saint's face twisted, and he shook with rage. Unable to bear it any longer, he shouted, "Things were better with the old sword god. He upheld the honor of the sword god style. He wouldn't have let them swagger in here no matter who they were. No one of the sword emperors left. You're a sword god, yet you won't even teach us skills. You sneak off alone and do all your training, then sit here in the training hall flirting with your woman day after day after day. It's the same thing here with these people. You ought to seek revenge yourself, but instead you entertain them while they ask you to be their servants. If you swallowed up your pride and submitted to a stronger enemy, that would have still been better than this. But instead you're making some half-baked declaration of neutrality? Do you want to make enemies of us, your followers? What is wrong with you? What good is a sword god like you?" Damn. Tell us how you really feel. Jeez. So, has that been cooking for like, what, 5 years? How long has that been cooking, boy? Jeez. A hush fell over the training hall. Gino's expression hadn't changed. He just doesn't give a... This sword saint, who he can probably kill by spitting at his face, flicking his finger, just disrespected him, and he doesn't give a... He looked just as unconcerned as before. Vacant even, like he was wondering what this guy was going on about. The man, on the other hand, had gone pale, like he said too much. You think? I was thinking maybe 2 lines of that was a bit too much. Each person's sword is their own. A victory for me isn't a victory for you, nor would I uphold your honor. Preach! I love this part right here, by the way. I defeated the last sword god because I wanted what Nina and I have now. That's why I act this way. And I didn't do it because I wanted to be your nursemaid. I defeated the last sword guy because I wanted this. Not to baby you. I ain't your dad. I love it. If you don't like it, you're free to leave. I wouldn't mind stepping down as sword god. But if I turned the title over to you, you'd drive me out, wouldn't you? Interesting. Giving a reason why he doesn't give it up. Again, because he talked about, I could have left when the emperors want to leave, but he wants this as his only home. He doesn't know anything outside of this place, so he wants to keep this. And if I give it to you, you'll just kick me out. He just wants what he has right now. He wants to be in here with Nina. I have no strong objection to leaving, but it's a bad time for me right now, while our children are still so young. There it is. There's a reason. It's not just this is his home. He has children there now. Again, this is a long distance from anywhere else. Getting up and leaving and going into instability, there's no point to it. If he has stability here, sure, hold the title. Why not? There was a sigh from the sword saints as they looked at the floor again. Ruiz half expected someone to call out that was wrong and he was not understanding. The energy in the hall was atrocious. Apparently, things weren't going too well between the sword god and his students. Was it because Gino was still young himself? If he didn't work things out with these guys, he could easily find himself surrounded by enemies. There's no need to be like that. You could at least give them a show. It was Nina who broke the silence. She raised her head from Gino's shoulders, sat up straight, and tucked her legs beneath her. I'd like to see you fight too. She instantly fixed the situation. It's like Nina just speaks up and goes, just give them a show. Show them why they suck. All right, just for you, Nina. Just like that, Gino got on his feet. Arf, arf. Arf, arf, arf. You want that? Arf, arf. As though all of his reluctancy had so far had been no more than an act, did Nina have him that whipped? More to the point, if he could change like that, was he even stable? To Rudius, at least, he looked anything but. Was this guy okay? Rudius, are you really want to talk? Are you really want to talk? Doubt. How about you, Edis? Gino's stronger than he was before. In response to that, Edis rose to her feet too. Okay. Edis looked at Rudius, then tossed something. He caught it without thinking, then saw it was her sword, the magic sword, Windpipe. It was the sword the previous sword god used. Gino and Edis moved to the center of the training hall, where Alex stood. He shrugged. All right, who do I fight first? The weaker one, obviously. Edis said that, pushing Alec back. Interesting that she's willing to admit that, and I'm sure they've done some training sessions. He nodded in acceptance, then came back over to Rudius. There wasn't a drop of sweat on him. Rudius normally never seen him sweat, except for back in the Burhill Kingdom. What a bunch of good-for-nothings. Alex whispered to Rudius as he sat down. Here they have a chance to learn from those better than themselves, but they're not interested in learning. Yeah, even I can see that. Right? They're even worse than that gang that hangs out with my grandmother. This is interesting. Alec comes back over to Rudius, sits down next to him, and he's like, I don't get it. They don't want to learn. Like, Alec right here is literally wanting to teach them. They all want Alec dead. They're lining up to kill Alec. And he's trying to teach them like he's been doing with Sig. Again, technically that Sword Saint literally proposed it as like a training session. And Alec may have heard that and said, oh, they really want to learn? But he realized really quickly they don't want to learn. They're coming at me to fight. They're not observing why they're losing. They're just coming at me to fight. They're even worse than the gang that hangs out with my grandmother. To be fair, it was a little different than Atofe's personal guard. For them, it was learn or die. So they had no choice but to get stronger. With that, though, Rudius looked over to see Edis raise her wooden sword. As usual, she held it above her head in an offensive stance. Sword God Gino dropped down over his back foot, his hand on his sword. The stance reminded Rudius of Ghislaine, but Gino was far more tranquil. When Ghislaine dropped into that stance, she wagged her tail with a fearsome glint in her eyes. She's going with the same style, right? Like she was waiting for the right moment to sink her teeth into her prey. Gino, meanwhile, was empty. Like Orr said earlier, he was so still, it seemed as though time had stopped. Nothing could get by him. I kind of wonder if they're bringing this up on purpose. Like possibly Gino had learned something from Ghislaine at some point, and he's adopting her style, which technically, again, would probably been adopted from Galfalion. Edis slowly edged towards him. If it hadn't been for the earlier conversation, Rudius' heart might have been in his mouth. He might hit her, but she wouldn't die. Still, Rudius wondered if he'd be okay. Wondered if Orsted could be counted on to stop them if it went too far. I'm assuming you don't need a start signal? No. Then, it was over. Edis takes a blow to her sword hand and drops to one knee. Her wooden sword spins away through the air and hit the wall of the training hall with a clatter. That was all Rudius managed to see with his demon eye before, scarcely a second later, it became a reality. To Rudius, it looked like Edis moved first. Before she finished saying no, the tip of her sword was already a blur, but she lost. Gino had been faster, and his strike had broken her sword arm, except it wasn't just her sword arm. The big toe of Edis' front foot was bent in the wrong direction, so he had struck twice, a multi-hit attack. That's crazy. No, instantly, she swings once, and in that time, it's implying he struck twice. That's insane. That is insanely fast. Rudius can barely keep up with one strike with his demon eye. 2. Edis' arm and toe were broken, but she didn't back down. It'd take more than that to stop her. She charged forward with one good leg, a savage grin on her face, and then, all of a sudden, she relaxed and yielded. It took a split second for her to realize, and it's not happening. Yeah. It probably dawned on her she got hit twice. The moment it dawned on her she got hit twice, no. And it implies later on, this isn't a fight to death, so who cares? That's enough. said Orsted, his voice ringing out through the hall. Interesting that Orsted says something. Kind of gives something to Rudius what he was thinking about. I hope Orsted will step in. This is Orsted stepping in. You'll stop now, or I will jump in there, because Rudius is expecting me to do that. I won't let you kill Edis. At this, people began to let out admiring ahs and saying things like incredible. But they were in the minority, and even then, their voices carried a note of confusion. The Sword Saints whispered amongst themselves. What happened? Did she dodge the first strike? He struck her ankle first. She didn't fully dodge it. So her toe? But what about the second strike? It was over so quickly that they couldn't tell who the winner was. But it was obvious at a glance. Edis sank to the ground, sweat pouring off her, while the sword god, still standing, languidly lowered his sword. Gino had agreed to the Sword Saints' demands for a demonstration, yet they couldn't even work out what he had done. Like, yeah, they wanted that, and they can't even follow it. It made Rudius wonder what the point of this was. Perhaps frustrated by this very thing, the Sword Saints' faces were stony. Underneath that, Rudius sought a hint of relief. The honor of the Sword God's school was safe. If their egos were satisfied, then that was a win for Rudius. Yeah, I think that's what Nina wanted. Nina's like, just silence them. Incredible, Sword God, Alex said too loudly. Your first strike was aimed at her ankle, but then you swung up along the shortest possible path to hit her wrist. It didn't matter if you hit her ankle or if she dodged. Either way, you delayed her first strike just long enough that you created an opening at her wrist where you can counter. Only a fighter with total confidence in the speed of his sword could perform such a feat. It sounded like he'd heard the Sword Saints' confusion. They nodded, saying, I get it now. Thanks for the commentary, Alec, Rudius thought. Alec remained sitting, but there was a hint of reproach in his eyes as he looked at Gino. It was a look that said, you're their master, you should teach them. He wanted to teach his entire time, and there's a chance to teach. Teach him! In the old days, you would have attacked me, even in that state. If this was time to stand my ground, I'd still be fighting. You really are something, Edis. Yep. If she had somebody to protect or something, she'd be chomping on his leg or something. With a hint of a smile, Gino nodded slowly. In response, Edis laughed, but there were beads of sweat on her brow. A broken wrist or ankle was enough to make Edis cry, but it still had to hurt. Rudius stood and dashed over to her. You okay? Yeah, I'm fine. Hurry up and heal me. But don't get any ideas in touching anywhere else. We're in public. Yes, ma'am. Rudius casted healing on her broken bones. Since he'd been warned, he didn't cop a feel. Despite it being a mock battle, Gino had hit hard enough to break bone. Rudius shuddered to think what would have happened if he hit her head or her neck. At least Orsted was here. So long as he didn't take off her head, there was no permanent harm done. The sword god sure was something. Rudius hadn't seen his sword move at all. Just like his predecessor, he didn't want this guy as an enemy. Yeah. Power. Massive power. Rudius spoke to Edis. Well, he was devastating. I hate to say it, but I never had a chance. Rudius was asking about her injuries, but that was the answer he got. She sounded genuinely regretful, and she was frowning. Being a mother hadn't made her less serious about her sword work. In the end, she was mad that she lost. She always hated losing. It's my turn then? As Rudius led Edis back, Alec got on his feet, his face aglow with excitement. But before he could rush in, he looked back to Orsted. Sir Orsted, may I? As you like. Was Orsted giving him permission to beat the crap out of Gino? That could change the order of the 7 great powers. Gino had declared his neutrality, and Edis' defeat just now had satisfied the Sword Saints' egos. As of now, the Sword Sanctum was neutral. If the Sword God lost, that equation changed. Not only Gino, but most of the Sword Sanctum might turn against them. This was tricky, and Rudius wondered if he should stop it. I guess, I think Gino has already made it pretty clear he doesn't care about this conflict. And now Rudius almost feels like if he beats him now, it's going to cause that conflict to brew up again. I think it'd be a solidification to them, if anything. If he knocks down Gino right here, you don't want to go up against these people. These are bigger dogs. Step down. Back off. On the opposite end, if Gino wins, it shows that Gino is worthy of respect. I think the reason why he's asking Orsted right now is simply to the idea of, we've talked about this possibly before, about Gino himself, and he could have possibly told him, I want to go over there, observe him, and find out if he's somebody that will turn against us, and this may be a question of, is this to your will? Again, technically Alec looks to Orsted for all the approval that he does right now. He has a massive respect for Orsted and will follow him. Is this okay, sir? Can I do this, sir? But nope, he couldn't say anything, not after Orsted had given the go-ahead. All he could do was think about how to repair it if things went wrong. On guard, Alex stepped forward. This was a mock battle with wooden swords, but the fighters were still the North God and the Sword God. It was no exaggeration to call a battle between the great powers. Hell yeah, hype. 7 was just an arbitrary number, which would win. In terms of experience, Alec had the advantage. The Sword God had beaten his predecessor, but he was still young. He hadn't done enough yet. Yeah, my assumption was that Alec was going to lose. Because again, what did Orsted say? I believe he mentioned that, I don't know if he mentioned all of them, but he did imply the idea that Alec would go against Gino, and Gino would defeat him. Alec had his pride as the North God Kalman III. He'd also gotten a preview of his opponent and could follow his moves. Alec stood with his sword held in front of him. Gino dropped down over his back foot. Who would move first? Usually, you'd expect Gino, the Sword God-style fighter, to attack, and the North God fighter to counter. But Reese had the feeling the opposite could happen. It was Alec who moved first. Interesting. Very interesting. I wonder if there is an element of him sort of wanting to read Alec first. Again, because technically, Rada did inch that place. And again, Gino did go out to study his own stuff. He may have gone out to check out other fighting styles. This time, Ruiz saw it. A thrust from the center, moving so fast, it was like no motion rather than slow motion. What? It's a weird way of saying that. Gino's sword was even faster. He timed his slash perfectly to meet the tip of Alex's thrust, deflecting it a scant few degrees, and that was as much as Ruiz saw. The next thing he knew, Gino's sword had vanished. A moment later, he saw Alex's left hand hanging limp and broken. Simultaneously, Alex stepped back. A black line remained on the floor of the training hall where he stood. Gino must have used the same simultaneous attack that had beaten Edis, but this time he hit his wrist first. Put a black line on the floor? Like he just burnt the floor because it moved so damn fast? Just cut through it. Crazy, dude. Crazy fast. Even for Alec. Even Alec, the North God. So fast. Now, technically, yes, Alec was the 7th. And again, it goes in that whole idea of what the numbers even mean. That image, by the way, that image goes hard. If I actually cared about Gino whatsoever, I would probably want to get that on a display. But I don't really care about Gino. I mean, this is an interesting chapter, but I don't really have like a connection to Gino that I want a display of Gino. But I want like that of something else. Like Edis fighting Gino would have been cool to have that image as a display. Alec readjusted the grip of his sword with his broken hand. Well, Rios had thought it was broken, but it had healed almost instantly. Interesting to note that, because it felt like during the battle in the Brahil Kingdom, he wasn't regenerating that fast. Like, even when he was fighting Rudius, he was fighting with a broken leg, if I remember correctly. He wasn't restoring that fast. Here it feels like his immortal demon blood is actually working a lot faster. I wonder if that's coming with his new training or something, or at least him finally challenging himself in his training. That'd be his immortal demon blood at work. There was a fire in his eyes that seemed to say, in North God style, this is where the real fight begins. Stepping forward, Gino launched into a ferocious attack. With every swing of his sword, he broke one of Alex's arms or legs. It didn't take Alec more than an instant to recover, so the attacks didn't disable him. But that was the only upside. Alec was probably trying plenty of moves, but none fazed his opponent. Gino didn't allow a single opening for Alec to go on the offensive. At last, Alec lowered his sword. I yield. He was unwounded, but his clothes were in tatters. It kind of implies that with his demon blood, he could just keep going and going. He's going to keep restoring himself. But again, he's acknowledging, and I think he does later on, if he had a real sword, I'd be in pieces, so he technically has won. The only reason I'm still going is because I have demon blood and we're using practice swords. He's obviously the winner. The tip of his sword was in splinters. Gino, meanwhile, was unscathed. Damn! Damn! Gino's freaking insane, dude. He was damp with sweat, but it was still an overwhelming victory. Reese hadn't expected there to be such a wide gap, not against an opponent as strong as Alec. Gino was definitely one of the great powers. Yeah, my word, you're strong. This has to be a reminder that no matter how strong you are, there's always someone stronger than you. But you fought one-handed. Who knows what would have happened if this was a real battle? If it were a real battle, I'd expect to be in pieces. Alex spoke, graciously accepting his defeat. He's a good dude. He got humbled bad. This is what the sword god could do with a practiced sword without a scabbard. With a real sword, he'd be even faster. The gap between them might be even greater then. Right. Still gripping his wooden sword, Alec came back to Ruius' party and sat. Despite losing, his expression was bright. He learned something. He likes learning. There was a touch of disappointment there, but nothing like how he'd yelled and cried back in Burhill Kingdom. He'd grown. Yeah, he's a good boy now. Ruius glanced over and saw that all the eyes were on him. Even though the sparring was over, Gino was still at the center of the hall. He was watching Ruius too. He heard the sword saints talking in hushed voices. 7 great power. We get to witness a battle between 2 great powers. Not the sword god Alud, of course. We might even get to see the dragon god Orsid's powers. Huh? What? Say what? Ruius thought. Sir Rudius, Alec whispered in his ear. By all means, demonstrate to them the might of the magic armor in which you used to defeat me. At that, Ruius responded automatically. He already had a speech prepared. My word, you at the Sword Sanctum really do get fired up about your training. But would you look at that? The sun's about to set, and I'm starving. What do you say we wrap things up here? It didn't go so well. It didn't go over so well. Ruius wrapped up his visit to the Sword Sanctum. The Sword Saints all thought he was a coward. But what did he care? Yeah, Ruius doesn't care. It might sting a little bit, but don't care. The Sword Sanctum, or rather, Gino Brits, would remain neutral as long as he lived. That was good enough for them. And that is the chapter. My gosh, this recording went on way too long. This segment was way longer than I expected, but I wanted to finish up that chapter. I know there's like one more chapter, I believe, that gets into Nina. Yeah, there's a Nina Brits chapter, which might actually work out because there's the Nina Brits chapter, and I think after that's one final chapter, ? So that might actually wrap up the Mushoku Mendes for Volume 2 perfectly. But yeah, these 2 chapters were great. Again, getting into Gino Brits, which we really haven't touched on really at all besides perspective from Nina. Getting more into him, what made him so strong, and then having this brief moment of kind of... Really, this chapter felt like kind of an aftermath of that, showing more into Gino and his sense of honor and what he wants to do with his life and his focus on his bride. And again, it might get into more on that in the next chapter because it's going to be about Nina. Maybe it's going to get into really their relationship and seeing the more loving side of him besides him snuggling up against her in the trading hall. Seeing like the real like down-to-earth side of him rather than him in front of all of his people would be great. I'm actually more excited to see more of that too as well. But it was a good set of chapters here. A little bit of flexing, getting to see just how freaking powerful he is, how powerful Alec is, and really kind of seeing how much Alec has grown. It's interesting to see how much he has changed. It went from, again, him being like this whiny little kid to him being like turned into basically Orsid's dog to seeing him just being somebody that wants to help people learn. I love seeing him just wanting to teach people. They wanted to learn. I wanted to help them learn. They don't want to learn. They just want to fight. They just want blood. That's all they want. Some interesting stuff here. I really did like this stuff. So anyways, that is it for this Mushoku Monday. Hope you guys enjoyed this Mushoku Monday. As always, thank you guys so much for dropping by for the premiere chat. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Tell me in the chat if you liked it. Hit the like button if you liked it. I hate that you guys don't hit the like button. Babakas, hit that like button before you leave. But I thank you guys so much. Your kind words, all your support. Yes, as always, more so than ever. Greatly appreciate it. Supports channel monetarily through Patreon, tips, links, super thanks, memberships, all that stuff. You guys are absolutely fantastic. Like I said before, we'll probably wrap up this particular volume next week with these last 2 chapters. We'll see. Depends on how long it is, how much we chat, all that stuff. But yes, thank you guys so much. And until next time, you'll take care. It seems you're everything I heard you were, Rudius. I was sure they were all people of good moral character. I was sure they were all good moral. Before he knew it, his fence